Senator Steve Daines, now with us here on Montana Talk. Senator, great to hear from you. How would you recap the trip to China?
Well, Aaron, it was. I think it was productive. I wanted to make sure that we were communicating, first of all, President Trump's desires, and as well as working with his Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, and then Ambassador Lighthizer, who is the U.S. trade rep for President Trump. We want to communicate a strong message to the Chinese leadership that the president is serious, that there is support on both sides of the aisle to confront these unfair trade practices that China has engaged in for decades, that they're not going to get a better deal by trying to wait till after an election, that now is the time to come to the table and finalize this deal that we nearly had finalized back in May. The President and Xi Jinping were very close to having a deal done in May, and the Chinese walked away from it. I think there was some internal politics on the China side, and so we just wanted to push them to come back to the table and let's get this deal done. And the good news is that shortly thereafter we got news that in this month, in September, there'll be staff members from Xi Jinping's team as well as President Trump's team working together to really set the stage for an important formal round of negotiations. It'll be here in Washington, D.C., between Vice Premier Liu He as well as Secretary Mnuchin and Trade Rep Lighthizer. Now, when I was in China, I was able to meet directly across the table with Vice Premier Liu He. He is the point person for Xi Jinping on all of these trade negotiations. So it was an honor to bring the voice of Montana, literally, the voice of Montana agriculture, to the leadership in China. In fact, I hand-delivered, Aaron, some letters, one from the Montana wool growers, one from the stock growers, one from the grain growers of Montana, that were addressed to Xi Jinping, but I literally had an envelope in my hand and handed them to Vice Premier Liu He to make sure they understood how serious we were about resolving this current conflict with China, and importantly, the opportunity we have for Montana agriculture going forward in China.
How badly are they feeling the pain from this trade war in China right now?
Yeah, well, Aaron, that's a great question, and if anybody read the Wall Street Journal yesterday, front page, there was a great article about how many economists believe that what's going on in China is much worse than what the Chinese are reporting. And I think that's likely true. I think Xi Jinping, the president of China, he needs and wants a trade deal. He needs to get this resolved. There's another compounding factor that I got to hear firsthand from our U.S. Embassy ag folks on the ground there, and that is the African swine fever. This is a virus that's sweeping through China and decimating their pork production, their pig herds. It started up in northeast China along the Russian border. A year ago in August, it spread all the way down now to Vietnam and Myanmar, so it's come full circle around the country of China. And by some estimates, 30 to 50% of their pig herd has died because of this horrible African swine fever. And so the Chinese, they have to replace this protein source. I tell you what, I've got some great ideas for that. I know our Montana producer would. How about some Montana beef? How about we've got some pork, but you think about lamb, which has been banned. We can't export U.S. Lamb into China. We're working to get that removed, like we did with the beef export ban that was in place for 14 years. Got that removed. But even despite the current trade dispute with China, would you take a look at U.S. beef exports to China? They're continuing to increase, even though we have these high tariffs in place. I'll tell you why. Because U.S. beef is the best beef in the world, and the Chinese consumer is willing to pay a premium for high-quality U.S. beef. So the opportunity, Aaron, long-term, whether it's for grain growers, for wool growers, for our stock growers, is huge when you think about long-term and 1.4 billion consumers over there in China.
It's kind of like freedom. Once you get a taste of it, you get a taste of that Montana beef, you're going to want more of it. Their consumers are going to demand it, whether the Chinese government wants it or not. And how long can they contain that for? So would you say you're more optimistic? How much more optimistic are you that a trade deal will be reached here sooner rather than later following this trip?
I'd say two things, Aaron. Number one, it's good to see that this month in September, they've announced that staff members from Xi Jinping's team and President Trump's team will be meeting to work ahead and set the stage for an important round of negotiations going to be in October in Washington, D.C. Vice Premier Liu He will be coming to Washington, D.C. Again, that's who I literally sat across the table from in Beijing last week. He will be coming over representing Xi Jinping in China, meeting with Secretary Mnuchin, Trade Rep Lighthizer for another round of negotiations. That's a good sign. I'll tell you what, though, this probably will take longer than we think. I just know, working with the Chinese, it's going to take some time. But it's a very good sign that they're back to the table negotiating after China walked away from the deal in May. Remember, they were very close to a deal in May, and we were stunned when the Chinese just completely walked away from it. And President Trump held firm. He said, "You can walk away, but I'm not. I'm holding firm." They were kind of hoping that President Trump would somehow cave to the fact they walked away from the table. But Trump is a shrewd negotiator, and we sent a message to the Chinese government that President Trump is serious. So we need you to seriously come back to the negotiating table, and we're going to get a much better deal because of it, in my opinion.
Well, and if any of his critics on Capitol Hill who want to take shots at the administration on trade, well, hey, until they pass the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, no more talking trash on trade. Get that job done first, and then maybe we'll listen to your complaints. But either way, Senator Steve Daines, greatly appreciate you taking out the time from your busy day as Congress is back in session now on Capitol Hill.
Hey, thanks a lot, Aaron. We'll keep up the good fight.